couldn't make it tonight. And we put all of these on YouTube. So actually, if you have missed a past one and you're curious to check out other presentations, they are all up there and able to view. So it's kind of neat because we've covered a lot. I was thinking like this is our 5th one this year. We've covered a bit of ground so far. So that's kind of fun. Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing a ton of folks jumping in. There we go. If you want to get us started, Andrea, I think we could probably do that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Empowered by Place. I'm Andrea Malcolm, Director of Historic Denver's Molly Brown House Museum, and this is Allison Salutes, our Director of Community Programs. I want to start out really quick, just acknowledging with respect that the land we're discussing today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations. This was also an important site of trade for numerous other Native tribes. So we recognize the Indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land, and their descendants still reside here. So as these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the historic and present ties these nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and affirmed. I'm going to go ahead and launch a very quick poll, so everyone get ready to flex their muscles. We're going to be asking you which SCFD county you're joining us from this evening. So you should see a poll up on your screen. Looks like we have votes coming in. We just love to know where you're coming from. This helps us with our Scientific and Cultural Facilities District funding. We apply to these counties to receive grant funds and do great programs like this Empowered by Place. So we appreciate all of you participating in the poll and letting us know where you're coming from. And I'll just give that a few more seconds. It looks like we have most everyone responded. All right. I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Looks like Denver County is strongly representing this evening in our participants. And I am going to turn it over to Allison to introduce our speakers this evening.
Wonderful, thank you. And we just have been rolling through a few upcoming events, which included our next Empowered by Place, which is going to take place on November 4th. And we'll be talking about Elitch, so Mary Elitch, the Elitch Theater, everything that's happening around there. So that's what you guys have been seeing on your screen here. But I do want to go ahead and get us started because this evening we have 3 amazing speakers joining us. And then I think we're going to have one additional voice to our panel at the end. So we have a really, I think, wonderful program to enjoy this evening. But our first speaker is Charlazine Terry Nelson, who is the Special Collections and Community Resource Manager at the Blair-Caldwell African American Research Library. She has 30 years of library experience and has served all kinds of roles from bookmobile librarian, manager of Library Film Center, a reference and humanities librarian, and served in volunteer services at the Denver Public Library as well. So she is really going to help us start our conversation based in history. Going to give us kind of the background, the old history of the neighborhood, and help us understand kind of what the past was like for 5 Points. Is that, and feel free to correct me, Terry, if that did not sum it up well.
That's fine. That's fine. You tell me when to go.
I think you can go for it.
Okay. What I'm going to do here is give you a brief history of 5 Points development. The old days, as my children say, the days of the dinosaur, to the new. In 1870, the word was out about Colorado.
Thank you.
Uh-oh. The East Coast and the West prospectors and European immigrants and African Americans newly freed from slavery, they rushed to Denver to find work and their fortunes in silver and gold. Denver seemed to be the perfect place to begin a new life. and African Americans escaping the oppression and racism of post-Civil War South found work laying track for the railroad companies. The completion of the Denver Pacific and Kansas Pacific rail lines in 1870 enabled Denver to become a major trade center of the West. 5 Points was one of the first subdivision parcels of this area. It was described as far away from the city in the wide open prairie. It is initially settled by Germans, Irishmen, and Jewish population. It was named 5 Points in 1881 for the five-way intersection of Welton, 27th Avenue, Washington, and 26th. They all came together in a star in front of what we know as the Rossonian Hotel. The Curtis Park was the biggest part of the district, and because of that, it was called the most elegant streetcar suburb in Denver in the 1880s. As Denver's population grew, the area known as 5 Points became the heart of the Black community, seeking approximately work, such places as industrial plants, rail yards near the Platte River to the neighborhood. So people coming here right from the Platte River up to where they ended up in Welton were all very happy to find this wonderful place on the plains. In 1890, more African Americans lived in 5 Points than any other part of the city. By the early 1900s, restrictive housing covenants and segregation forced African Americans to stay in the 5 Points. This was our first introduction to redlining. Restrictive real estate rules told people not to sell or allow African Americans to buy property in certain areas. For African Americans in Denver and throughout Colorado, 5 Points became a city within a city. No one said this better than Charlie Cousins. Mail was often addressed to 5 Points, Colorado. The community nurtured entrepreneurialism, creativity, and preserving the spirit of the people who lived and worked there. Some familiar names to you might be Dr. Justina Ford, Madam C.J. Walker, Benny Hooper. During the Depression, Benny Hooper helped to create a sense of hope for the community. Musical history was also made there. In 1930 to the 1940s, 5 Points was considered a requisite stop for famous entertainers traveling between the Midwest and West Coast. People like Count Basie, Lionel Hampton, Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald. They came to be seen and perform at the historic Rossonian. They performed most of the time to sold-out crowds. Music filled the air all night, and the musicians played. Also in after-hours clubs like the Casino Ballroom and Lil's. After World War II, soldiers returning from the war found the same old attitudes. They were not welcome in restaurants in downtown Denver, hotels, theaters, or clubs. Once again, 5 Points was our community center. We banded together. Groups such as the NAACP and CORE worked towards civil rights, while the Urban League set the goal for better jobs. From 1940 to the 50s, 5 Points thrived. It was the business, social, and cultural scene in the city and county of Denver. Westerners often compared 5 Points to Harlem, often known as the Harlem of the West. Benny Hooper opened the Ex-Servicemen Club for African American soldiers to have a place to call their own. And the Rossonian, of course, continued its sold-out performers, and white patrons stood in line to get in. In 1959 through 1965, the area began to decline because of lifting the restrictive real estate covenants. Many residents moved from the area to take advantage of open housing. This caused 5 Points to lose much of its extra funds that were received from people who lived there, who ran on the road, who had regular jobs, and who populated and attended all the businesses. Urban renewal came in the 1960s. They tore down whole blocks of old houses, which were often replaced with public housing. Platte Valley, which is often called Curtis Park housing, was built. Lincoln Homes, which is now going to be a second cultural district, and the neighborhood came and continued to decline in the 1970s. Today, new housing and commercial development, as well as renovation projects, have begun to breathe new life into this historical cultural district of 5 Points. People want to exercise urban living are moving into 5 Points from the suburbs, and the historic housing stock is slowly beginning to renovate. Renaissance of Black developers and property owners returned to buy property in the area, some of which you may have heard: the Fly Fisher Group with Chauncey Billups, the renovating of the Rossonian, also in that group, Robert Smith and Association, and Dr. Renee Cousins King, who continues to develop her dad's legacy. The also coming there is the new hotel named the Hooper, and it's a huge, huge hotel. All of these places have developed and transitioned in and out to make what we now call 5 Points, the historical cultural district of 5 Points. Some of the people that you might recognize that have been a old-time settlement group of 5 Points was Lewis Douglas and his younger brother, Frederick Douglass. They were both sons of the abolitionist Frederick Douglass. They had a mortuary in 5 Points called the Douglass Mortuary. They joined their father's friends, Barney Ford, and you've heard of the lucrative Barney Ford, who has several wonderful restaurants and hotels down in Lodo at one time. And Henry Wagner, William Jefferson Hardin, and Edward Sandlian. Edward Sandlian had an interesting story in that he was a very prominent property owner, and often he would tell the Anglo people in Curtis Park and further out to Capitol Hill that African Americans were coming in to buy the church property, and they would leave. And he ended up owning a huge amount of property there, and he reversed the script and often had Anglo drivers and servants in his house. So these are some of the people who added to the culture and color of the history of old 5 Points that is moving to the new 5 Points that you are looking at. Another interesting story about 5 Points was the railroad and the, I call it the transportation history of 5 Points, where in the early 1880s, 1818, 5 Points had horse-drawn railroad cars to come to 5 Points. And when they came there, eventually they were replaced by the HEDIC, HERDIC coach company, and we called it the streetcar. And that line that ran through 5 Points at the intersection of Welton Street, Washington 27th, all of those coaches in that area that ran through the city had the name on the side of each of the coaches where it stopped. However, in 5 Points, there were too many names for the stop, and that particular coach ended up being 5 Points because it had more names than there was room to put on the coaches. Also, many people in the neighborhood didn't really like the name 5 Points because it actually represented a rather rowdy part of New York, and they didn't want that kind of reputation there. But for some reason, it won out, and 5 Points is the name to stay forever. So that's a kind of interesting piece, and not many people understood how that area was named, and that's how it was named. So those are just a few little tidbits about it. I'll give you some resources and tell me if I'm talking too long, because I can go on a while. Here's a few resources that you might check out in terms of reading to get more older history of 5 Points and move it into the future. One book called Growing Up Black in Denver by Billy Grant and Ernestine Smith and her sister Gladys is a very popular reference source at the Blair-Caldwell Library. And the other one that the two of them came together with was Cherishing Colorado's Black Families. And this was written by Ernestine Smith and Gladys Smith. The Smith girls were entertainers. They were dancers. And they were a long-time historical family here in 5 Points. And you will hear from Terri Gentry. That was part of her family. The other one that's interesting that people often ask for are called A Chronicle of Precious Memories. It's by Nicella Elizabeth Scott Jackson, Judge Jackson's mother. And she talks about Lincoln Hills, and that's an important part of 5 Points because many of the people there began and lived in that area. Also, a young lady who worked with us as a volunteer wrote a book called 5 Points Neighborhood of Denver, and it has been a very popular piece because it gives you a broad look at 5 Points. Then our first African-American mayor has written a book more talking about the modern times of 5 Points. It's called Wellington, Webb, The Man and the Making of Modern Denver. We also have another one by Mr. Phil Goldstein, and he writes about this part of central Denver in numerous books. And the one that that contains 5 Points is called Curtis Park, 5 Points and Beyond, the heart of historic East Denver. And Dr. Stevens, who was a professor, worked with a young lady at the Black American West Museum, and they put together one called African Americans of Denver. You'll get a good look at that. Then there are a few newspapers and magazines. one that's out of print that talked about the new and modern African Americans in the cultural district is called In the Black. We have numerous bound copies of that magazine that gives you a good look at the population in the modern times. Then we, of course, and you probably all have heard of the Colorado Statesman and the Denver Star, which we have on microfilm at both the Western History Library at Central Library and at Blair-Caldwell, and Denver Weekly News and Urban Spectrum. These are some of the popular readings about the development, the history of 5 Points, and who made whatever happened in 5 Points happen. So that's my little clip on basic history and background of 5 Points then and now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terri. I was wondering, just real quick, you referenced Lincoln Hills. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about what it was in case people don't know?
Oh, sure. Lincoln Hills was actually the only, what do we call, a resort for African Americans in the mountains outside of Clear Creek in Lincoln Hills. And the area had the Winks Lodge, and many of those people that I spoke of who were entertainers came to Colorado for that experience also, because it was a discipline. It wasn't a discipline, I should say. It was a comfortable, free area where there was no discrimination or anything. It was just fun. They had music, they played, they had great food. Winks Lodge was known for its food. People came up as African Americans and came up to recreate and enjoy the area, but also it was advertised that for purchasing the area, and you could purchase property there for little or nothing, and you could build your own cabin, so you could have a vacation cabin. And many people in the community and throughout the United States heard about this recreation resort and came and purchased property up in Lincoln Hills.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I used to work at History Colorado, and we had an exhibit on Lincoln Hills, but I always was surprised that it's not something always that folks have already heard of. So I appreciate you doing a little,
right,
since you referenced it, going back.
We gave them the information on Lincoln Hills. We had a young lady who passed at 106, Marie Greenwood, who was a counselor in the area at Camp Nizoni in Lincoln Hills. And the Y, the Phyllis Wheatley Y, actually paid money to have inner city girls have an opportunity to have a mountain experience. And they would go to Lincoln Hills at Camp Nizoni and have fun. They got to swim in the cold creek and ride horses and look at nature and all the things that they generally wouldn't have the opportunity to do if they stayed in the inner city. And the Y, Phyllis Wheatley Y, paid the funds for them to be able to have that experience.
Yeah, super neat. I do want to give a chance. Obviously, you guys can see what a font of information Terri is, and so I imagine that you have some questions following that wonderful presentation. So either feel free to unmute yourself, ask Terri directly, or put it in the chat, and I'm happy to feed those questions to her if you guys are wondering anything. Before we move on. Yeah, go ahead, Gil.
Hi, thank you so much for your deep knowledge and just information that you know, and it's fascinating. One of the things, I'm Japanese American, and one of the things that I've been fascinated by is because of redlining, the Japanese community was also kind of, a lot of them were in the City Park, 5 Points, Curtis Park area, as well.
You
And
are
so
correct.
my mother-in-law and father-in-law both went to Manual High School, and my mother-in-law was a friend of Wilma Webb, Wellington Webb's wife, and schoolmate. And so she has a yearbook from 1953, a Thunderbolt yearbook, where I think it's a homecoming attendance, not the prom, but the queen is African American, and the two attendants are Japanese American and Caucasian.
Right.
Which I love that. I use that in my own talks about local history. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of the mixture of the Japanese
Manual
and Black
High
communities?
School? We had, I would say, the most integrated high school in the city and county of Denver. And at Blair-Caldwell, we have the actual yearbooks from the early 1920s until about, I think they go all the way to 2015 of yearbooks. And if you peruse those books, you can see the diversity, the huge diversity that Manual High School had as students. They participated in all areas of the school. We had the most well-known band. When you'd hear us coming down the street, when I say us, I'm a Manual High School cohort too. And you would hear the band and the drums coming down. We had the best band. We had a wonderful choir. Our basketball team was very famous too. The football team was so, but it was an example of what can be done with diversity without any issues. We all just jumped in and did whatever was required of us. And we made a beautiful, beautiful combination of people doing a variety of leadership jobs in the city and county of Denver. Manual High School is the only high school to this date that can say they have 4 graduates that were mayors of the city, of major cities. We had Norman Rice, whose dad had the rice oven and tap room down on 5 Points, and is attributed to having started Juneteenth. Then we had Patsy Jo Morrison. She, I should say, Norman. It was the mayor of Seattle, Washington, and then Patsy Jo Hilliard was the mayor of East Point, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. And then our first African American mayor for the city of Denver was Mayor Wellington Webb, who was instrumental in building his legacy of the Blair-Caldwell African American Research Library. And now we have Michael Hancock. No other high school in the city can claim that. So it is a tribute to their ability to teach students leadership in all areas. And that's, I think, one of the landmark things that we talk about Manual, because we teased Mayor Webb and told him, you got elected because everybody in the city knew who you were. And that was because the school was so integrated.
Thank you so much.
You're certainly welcome. Come see us.
Did anybody else have a question for Terri before we move to our next speaker? Just a minute. Oh, Mary. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Terri, do you are you the docent or leader for the Historic Denver tour of 5 Points?
No, that's Terri Gentry, and she's a volunteer for the Black American West Museum, which is down on 25th and California, and she leads the walk down Welton and Denver, and she does a splendid job of the history because she has a family history in 5 Points.
My
And,
son,
but
my grown son and I took that tour one Saturday morning, and it was just wonderful because we started at the research center at the library, and
yeah,
I could not get past the how much memorabilia, how many photographs and they're on display. It's just, it's really, it's not overwhelming. It's just, it's very joyful. But I didn't remember the lady's name, and now that I see Terry's face, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. And it's a
mhm.
wonderful, wonderful tour. So recommend it highly
She,
to anybody that hasn't taken.
yes, we're on the list for Visit Denver and some other, certainly all over actually we've had people come in from all over the world to see what is here in Denver, because few people really recognize the contributions of African Americans in the West. And that was one reason Mayor Webb was concerned, because the students weren't learning about the contributions in school, and he wanted them to know that all communities had made considerable contributions to the success and development of the West, and particularly 5 Points because of its many treasures.
Wonderful. Yeah. And actually, Mary, you set us up perfectly because Terri is our next speaker.
Okay.
I'll throw out one last, if you have anything else you want to ask Terri Nelson, let me know right now. But I'm going to pivot to Terri Gentry, and Terri Nelson is going to stay until the end, and we'll have a little bit of a panel with all of our panelists if you do have other questions that pop up.
I did put in the chat. I was
Oh,
wondering
I'm sorry.
if
How did I miss that?
if Terri could talk about the Jewish population in 5 Points.
Well, what I can tell you is they had some great businesses down there, tailor shop, and I know a restaurant. Those are the two that I remember mostly, and the store. They had a little store there too in 5 Points, which, believe it or not, used to take script from people if they couldn't afford to pay right away for their food. They could leave a little ticket and say, "I owe you," and the owners would trust them and actually let them, on their paydays or whenever it was they're getting their money, they could. I can remember, I think a Ben Ziskin had a business down there too. And I can't remember whether it was a bottling business or what it was, but there was definitely a Jewish component there. There was an Asian component there. And that was the other wonderful thing about 5 Points. It was all these communities working together to build something.
I do believe that one of the Jewish temples is up there, and then it moved to Temple
yes,
Emmanuel in
that.
Uptown, and
Yeah,
then moved to Hilltop.
right.
Thank you.
Right. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question.
And sorry, guys, I just realized that I wasn't seeing the chat when Meredith pointed that out. So Susan had asked about the jazz history in Denver and how that connects to 5 Points.
You want me to talk about that too?
Do you, I know it's a long history. Do you think you could give us like the Cliff Notes version so we can move to Terri Gentry? Sorry. I apologize. It's my computer.
Okay, if you want to give it to Terri, I'll start it out. The clubs were, as I mentioned in my presentation, were places where the community enjoyed the music and found the music was a part of building the community. It was also like the Rossoni and the casino, and those places actually provided jobs for the community when people could not find jobs. And the Rossonian would actually house many of the jazz performers that came to Denver, usually promoted by Leroy Smith, and they would play downtown in all the fancy hotels and whatnot, and still were not, because of the laws, not able to stay there. So they would come back to 5 Points, their community, and entertain and do the after-hour jazz piece. And they would come to Denver because they knew they had a large support crowd, and it was the place that they could air out because of the wonderful climate, and they made good money because they had large entertainment crowds.
Thank you. I know it's a longer history, but I appreciate your brevity
Oh,
there.
it's a lot, but I just thought that would give Terry a time to
think
step
that's
in and have
perfect.
some more to say.
And Andrea's been dropping links in the chat too. So Susan, you may find more to your question there as well. So hopefully that was helpful. But I do want to take a moment to introduce Terri Gentry. She is a board member at the Black American West Museum and Heritage Center. Terri has worked with me on a number of projects, including she helps us with our 5 Points walking tour, as Mary mentioned. But Terri she's a wonderful resource and has a deep family history in the neighborhood that I'm gonna ask her to share with us now.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Hi, Miss Terri. Thank you so much for everything this afternoon. You're my hero and a wonderful mentor. So thank you for getting that ball rolling.
You are so welcome.
You know, I love doing the 5 Points walking tour and starting at the Blair-Caldwell African American Research Library, because there's such a wealth of information there and share so much history of our community. And a lot of the things that I learned are as a result of Terry Nelson's mentoring for me. So I'm so grateful to be able to do that for our community. And there's a question in the chat about the Black American West Museum. I'm a volunteer docent and also on the board of directors. And the museum is still closed. We're still working on some renovation work. We were able to take care of a lot of the exterior work. There's some interior things that have to be completed. So we're hoping to reopen in January of 2022, but I'm still doing walking tours this summer and any virtual presentations about Black Americans in the West or about the 5 Points Whittier neighborhoods, if groups are interested in seeing anything relative to that. So one of the questions that Allison asked me was to talk a little bit about my family history. And so I am humbled to be a member of the family. I am a descendant of the first Black licensed dentist in Colorado, Dr. Thomas Ernest McLean. And his best friend was Dr. Joseph H.P. Westbrook. They went to Meharry Medical School in Nashville. And Dr. Westbrook came first, and then my great-grandfather, Dr. Westbrook, graduated a year before my great-grandfather from medical school. So my great-grandfather started his dental practice in February of 1907, and then went back to Nashville and married my great-grandmother Lafayette and brought her back. May 26th, I think, is when they got married. And then they had twin daughters, Ernestine and Josephine McLean, who later became dancers during the RKO circuit. They were on vaudeville. And many of you may have heard of George Morrison, who we considered one of the cornerstones of our jazz history in the 5 Points neighborhood. And he also, for a time, was part of the Casino Cabaret, but he was a classically trained concert violinist and had a band that traveled around the neighboring states and traveled on during vaudeville on the RKO circuit and then down to California on the Pantasia circuit, and he wasn't allowed to play in the symphony orchestra in spite of all of the credentials that he had. The first Black person to be in the symphony orchestra played with George Morrison, and that's Charles Burrell. And Mr. Burrell will be 101 years old in October. So we need to celebrate that. And so George Morrison, he introduced my grandmother and my great aunt to Bill Bojangles Robinson back in the day when they were teenagers. And then they performed in New York during the Harlem Renaissance with a lot of the artists that Terry Nelson described too. So it was really cool talking to my grandmother, and she knew all of these folks, Cab Calloway and Honey Coles and Duke Ellington, and all of these folks were part of that history here in Denver. And I was born on Duke Ellington's 59th birthday, so or 58th birthday. So anyway, I have that on my dad's side. My dad is also a Thunderbolt who graduated in 1954, and he became a division chief with the Denver Police Department. That's what he retired as division chief of the Denver Police Department. And his classmates were Patsy Jo Hilliard and her husband, Asa Hilliard, who was a diplomat for the US as in addition to an educator. So we have some amazing folks that graduated from Manual High School, including some of the Buffalo Soldiers and Tuskegee Airmen, but especially Tuskegee Airmen such as John Mosley. And Colonel Hubert L. Hooks Jones, and the Denver chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen is named for Colonel Jones. He unfortunately passed away about 2 weeks before his 59th birthday. So they named the chapter in his behalf. And so, and all of these folks that I'm talking about, or if I didn't know them, I'm a descendant, and I'm humbled to be a part of that. Colonel Jones was like an uncle. John Mosley was like an uncle because they were close friends with my grandfather, George Washington Smith Jr., who was a member of the Owl Club of Denver. And my grandfather was also a Mason with Colonel Jones's dad and with some of the other members of the community. And then my grandfather also worked for Union Pacific Railroad, and that's what brought him to Denver. Was he was a vet, a World War II veteran, and he came to Colorado, and I guess just fell head over heels in love with my grandmother, Ernestine Smith. And so, he worked for the railroad. So that's my dad's side of the family. And my Aunt Charlene, my dad's sister, I was born on her 4th birthday too. She's a Manual High School graduate, graduated with a 4.02 GPA and got a scholarship up to CSU, and just an amazing woman herself. And then on my mom's side is the McLusters, MC capital Luster. So in that family, I have folks like Rosemary Marshall is the baby of the family. She was a state representative for 8 years in Colorado, and all of the other aunts and uncles that I have are part of that side of the family. And then my grandparents, Goldie and William J. McLuster. And then Goldie's mother was Callie Cromwell, and then Callie Cromwell's mother was Grand Ann. And Grand Ann and Grandpa Frank came to Colorado in 1903. They worked for a white family in Nashville and moved to Colorado in 1903. And Grandpa Frank was on the first board of trustees with Scotch United Methodist Church. Eventually they joined Shorter AME Church. And then Grand Ann's mother is Harriet Bailey. And Grandma Bailey, my great-great-great-grandmother, was born enslaved on the Bailey Plantation in Lauderdale County, Alabama in 1840. And she came out here to Colorado right after my great-great-grandparents came out here. So I have this incredibly rich history in the neighborhood, and everybody actually lived in the Whittier neighborhood. My grandparents, my great-grandfather, actually my dad's grandfather he built a house over there on York Street, And when they found out it was a Black man that built the house, they would not give him the keys. They burned a cross on the front lawn, and he had to move over on 32nd Street for a while. And then later they moved to 2538 Marion Street, where the first Black family on that block. And then my great-great-grandparents lived at 21st and Marion Street, or 21st and Lafayette. And then Grandma Mac and Granddad eventually bought a house at 2218 Lafayette Street. And then one of their sons, Uncle Frank, lived at a house in 24th and Lafayette. So we had lots of deep roots in the Whittier neighborhood, lots of incredible history there. And I'll stop there for a second to see if there's any questions about anything.
No, that's perfect. That's so good. You always give such a fascinating personal history that I just love hearing you talk. But yes, we should take a break to see if anybody has questions for Terri Gentry or anything you want her to expand upon, which she's mentioned so far. And I will actually look at the chat this time. Again, my apologies. Well, that might actually be perfect for now, Terri, because I think what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sharon, and then we'll get everybody back together at the end for a few more questions. So that'll give our audience a chance to think some up if they realize that they had some more, as well as just a good opportunity to hear from everybody again about more thoughts on this topic. So I wanted to introduce Sharon Nunnally. She's a native of Alexandria who moved to Denver in 1978 by way of Baltimore and Philadelphia. She served for many years in a corporate career, and then started a small business in architectural salvage, specializing in restored antique lighting sales and repair. She's a past chair of the Denver Landmark Commission, a past member of the Denver Planning Board, and a past member of the Capitol Building Advisory Committee, as well as numerous other committees and boards. So that's kind of some of her background. One of the reasons we wanted Sharon to join us in the conversation this evening is because she was helpful in putting together the 5 Points Historic Cultural District. And so I want to give her an opportunity to share with us a little bit more about that process.
Thanks a lot, Allison.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hey, Terry's, my friends and partners in historic adventures. I am the new kid on the block when it comes to being a Denver native. I've immersed myself in Denver in all the years that I've been here, and 5 Points became one of my favorite places and turns out one of my pet projects. So Wellington asked me to consider, I should be a little more formal, Mayor Webb asked me to consider putting together a historic district for the 5 Points area. And the attempt was trying to make sure that as much of the history would be preserved in a more formalized way, similar to other historic districts in Denver. Now, we had some dilemmas around trying to do this because one of the problems was that the landmark ordinance was not written in a way at that time that cultural districts were even a thought. And so I had to get kind of creative about how to make the ordinance and the historic district match up and be able to explain it to not only the property owners, but to the Landmark Commission itself. They were as hard on me about this district as some of the property owners were. And so as I embarked on this project, reluctance of property owners is kind of an understatement. But I sat on couches and ate lunch and played dutiful daughter with Mr. Cousins, even though I wasn't his daughter, but I I sat there while he, told me about everything that wasn't going to happen and why in the world. And I just listened quietly and tried to figure out, okay, I got to convince this guy of this, because the amount of property that he owned included some of the buildings we wanted to add to the district from the architectural side. The other component that we used, since there was no cultural, is that I used what was then a geographical classification for the 5 points and tied it to associated with a group of people. Now, the thought process, nobody had ever thought about it that way. Every time that stretch of landscape had tried to be designated, it was like, no, 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 because A, there was no property owner support, and B, nobody could just figure it out. We couldn't even get a designation on the National Register. Barbara Nordgren wrote an application for the Rossonian decades ago and could not get it through. So anyway, like I said, after much talking and near begging and all sorts of things, I managed to write an application using 7 buildings on the corridor, the 7 most intact and the 7 most recognizable buildings. And also using the period of time from the 20s to the 50s as the period of significance that would fit within the landmark guidelines at that time, and the location, 5 Points, as a very recognizable place for a group of people, African Americans, during that period of time. And also the significance of that period, it was a period of segregation. So I rolled this up into this great package, and after much explaining to the commission about why we did not have every building on that stretch from 24th to 29th as a contributing building, which was not doable. That was just, it was impossible, and there was too much stuff that just wasn't going to work. We managed to get it through. And then after getting through city council, we had ourselves a landmark district. So the next piece of that was the Markers Project. And it's what it's a component of the tour that Terri gives. And that was funded by the city and the state. And we've had some brochures, and I don't know how many of the brochures are available anymore, but it is a most fascinating story. Not only the buildings, but the people who inhabited the buildings. I had the great pleasure of meeting many of the owners. Some I already knew, but even more intriguing for me was the connection to all of these people and all of these buildings, and then people that I had met along the way, like Terri Gentry. And so I was like, oh, wow. So I had a lot of oh, wow moments. And so, and another oh, wow for me is that I ended up purchasing my first house, which was one of the parsonages for Scott Church. It was the second parsonage on William Street. And so, and that was also a fun event. So, you know, my path kept crossing with so many people, and not being a native, I felt like I was. So anyway, so that's how we finally got ourselves a district. I think it's a wonderful district. I know that there's been a lot of concern about whether or not the district will weather the new development process. We do have a design review a set of design review standards for the district finally in place that I think will help for the future. There's a little building at 29th and Welton. Used to be a church, a laundromat, cleaners, all sorts of things. And they have restored that to storefront style, which is pretty wonderful. And that was part of the intent. And it was part of what the guidelines were designed to do. You know, we've had some fits and starts on buildings down there, and I'll leave it at that. But I think we're on our way to having, you know, another great community for another 100 years. So that's my story.
Wonderful. And Sharon, we did have a question for you from Lori. She was wondering, what were the 7
Contributing
original
buildings.
contributing?
Okay,
Exactly.
the Rostonian, the Alta Cousins Terrace at 25th and Welton is on 25th. It's a beautiful restoration of a terrace block that Renee Cousins restored with the help of the state funding. And then there was Radio Pharmacy, which is the Wise Harris building. It's a red brick corner building at 26 and Welton. There's Atlas Drug, which is the US Bank building at 27th and Welton. There's the old Firehouse #1, the Douglas Mortuary, and the Roxy Theater. There's been 2 more added, and I think the 2 are, help me out here, Terry. Which 2? We're up to 9. Do you?
Rice's Tap House, that building, it's been restored over there on 29th and Welton.
28th, that one?
Yeah.
Okay, and did the Charles Cousins building, did that one come in? I don't remember. I know there's 9, and I apologize for not remembering the last 2, but I think we're up to 9. So it makes for a nice, cohesive little district without trying to call everything significant. Everything has history. There's no doubt about that. And everything has a story to tell, every building, every block, everything. But when we're looking at things that we're trying to tell a story, then we try to make that story as large as possible, as interesting as possible, and not be about the same people all the time. And by that, I mean, you can have 50 things that are recognized, but it still doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the story of what happened in the space. It doesn't necessarily tell you, inform you about everything else that goes with it. Sometimes my personal opinion is that sometimes things are designated in a vacuum. And so it's just, sometimes that's just what happens, and you don't know any more than what you knew before. So anyway, there you have it.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's great. I think actually we had one of our board members was saying like that when he first looked at the Denver landmark map, the key was just over all of Southwest Denver. So I think that kind of speaks to your point in that, yeah, sometimes we do a pretty good job at telling the exact same story a lot of times. But in good news, they have moved the key because now Southwest Denver has a couple landmarks.
Very
Not a ton,
good.
but a couple. So thank you so much for that and just kind of sharing what that process was like. It sounds like a lot of footwork, but I'm really glad that you were successful.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It sounds like, and that, and we helped a bit we helped the neighborhood to work on the La Alma Lincoln Park, which is now a second historic. What are there, like 25 years in between them? And I was just going to point out a couple things that Sharon said, just so that it's clear for everybody. But period of significance is an important part of the piece of legislation that Denver uses to landmark places. So you kind of have to, when you go in, like the work that she did to go in and put all these properties together, you have to pick a period of significance, and that determines what buildings fit the period of significance and therefore are contributing structures to the district. And then if you fall outside that time frame, you would be considered a non-contributing structure. So that's just a little bit of like fussy jargon that we can get more into if that isn't enough, but just so that kind of made sense. And then this whole kind of concept of a cultural component was not part of the original one either. They look at geography, they look at architecture, and they look at history, but adding culture is something that was very recently added in 2019 to the way that the city does it. And we're hoping it has longer term effects to kind of help potentially tell more diverse stories. I think also as Historic Denver, and I think our speakers might agree with me here too, we very much feel that culture is protected by placemaking. So we kind of need the places to tell the stories. So I think, just to kind of reiterate on everything that everybody has said, I do want now to introduce Fatima Dickerson, because she is going to join us. We are going to do just a few questions to all the panelists. So we've written a few, but all of you guys, please add them, either say them out loud or add them to the chat. Fatima runs the Welton Street Cafe. And so she has, I think, a very contemporary feel and handle on what 5 Points is, and kind of how it's functioning today, that I think will complement really nicely with some of the historical components that our other speakers this evening have shared. So everybody say hi to Fatima.
Hi. Hi, good evening. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Hi.
Thanks so much for signing in. Actually, now we can actually see each other's faces. We've only talked on the phone.
Phone, I know. It's crazy when you do interviews or any kind of conversation. You're like, I'm just talking to anybody. I don't know. But yes, there's a face to it.
Exactly.
But this has been great. This has been a lot of information, and a lot of information I wasn't aware of. So I appreciate that. My family has had Welton Street Cafe for 22 years. And my parents are originally not from here. They're from St. Thomas. And they came to Colorado in like the mid to late 70s. I am the youngest girl. So I'm the one telling the story as the youngest girl. So I definitely have a different perspective from like my oldest sibling, and we're 16 years apart. And so they've been in restaurants that I've never even been in because of my age. But our first restaurant was called the Caribbean, and it was it's still in 5 Points, but on near 30th and Downing, there was a Burger King that's now vacant now in that area. And so that's where my family started. But for the life of the business, we've been in 5 Points. And just growing up in the area and to see, especially in the 90s, like this place had everything that you needed. And now it's just like, we have to climb slowly but surely climb back up there. Like I remember, outside of the social aspect, I remember like Mr. Joe had a shoe shine or a shoe repair store. And this Miss Minerva had like a hat store. So it was like a clothing store. I remember Duncan's. I remember C&B Cleaners. So it was the cleaners and you can make keys. And there was like gift shops. So I think there were a lot more businesses that brought people, that kept our people, kept Black people in the neighborhood. And so to see that sort of shift and in the community, it it's concerning because it's just like, what do we need to do to help build that momentum back up, and encourage Black entrepreneurship in 5 Points, because there's Black entrepreneurs, but to be in a historically Black district, I think it speaks a different level of just wanting to be a part of a collective and be a part of the history. So one of the things that I like to always do, as much information as I have, I'm like, everything is for everybody. So let's share all of this information because it keeps us in a place where we're connected with one another and not separate. I know COVID has played a huge role in making us social distance and be just in these separate places, but we're better as a collective. And the more information we know to help each other, the better we are as a community, as a city, and just really the holding on to the original identity of 5 Points is crucial. So I'm here to be a representative, if nothing else, to let people know that there are still Black faces. And I know we have a couple of ladies, Miss Terri Gentry and Miss Terry Nelson. I know a lot of people saw our photo for Women's History Month, all these beautiful Black women on 5 Points, just dressed up. And so when I curated that, I said, we have to let people know we're still here. That representation piece is important, and we have to show face all the time. So I know there's so much I could say, but I'm open for questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. And actually maybe it kind of like cues up a nice question that could go to the whole panel, which is, maybe we can talk a little bit about like, how has 5 Points changed over the past decade?
For me, watching the neighborhood change, not just, you watch the people change. I think 5 Points never went anywhere. You see the people change, and 5 Points is what, the people is what makes 5 Points, that culture, that identity piece. And so when the original people have been removed or they don't frequent the area, it loses a little bit of that. We're having different shops pop up, and it creates a different culture. I don't like to talk about the bad parts of 5 Points because I know there's this negative stigma about 5 Points being dangerous and nobody wanted to go to 5 Points. And I'm just like, well, there's a lot of people who were here and stayed here during those uncomfortable times if they were uncomfortable for people, but I've lived through so much of the highs and lows of 5 Points, from the gang violence. That was huge. The hanging out was huge, and it did discourage people from coming. I know some businesses didn't feel safe coming to the neighborhood, but being here in 5 Points, it was just like, this is what we have to do. This was the home we chose to be in. I did briefly see something about the light rail changing. The dynamics of things. I'm kind of young with the light rail change, so I can't really speak to that. Not right now. I have to probably process that a little bit more.
That's totally fine. And I don't know if, sorry, was someone else talking?
Oh, I was going to just chime in here. Having spent a lot of time on 5 Points. In fact, when I came here, I heard about 5 Points. And so the first thing that somebody said to me, I remember, oh, watch out, you be careful when you go to 5 Points. Well, I'm coming from the East Coast and always have lived in an urban area. And so I was like, oh, well, let's go, let's go see. And I was really kind of surprised that there was nothing going on. I'm like, so what is it I'm afraid of here? And so that was, I just thought it was just really interesting, that perception. But like I said, I'm a big city urban girl, so that none of that stuff moves me. And I do think, though, that one of the things that did not help 5 Points, the business, and I will say the business part of 5 Points, is the fact that light rail came along and they single tracked it on one side. That literally brought things to a standstill for a lot of businesses. There was much discussion about where should that light rail be. And, you know, there was double track discussion, there was single track, should it be in the middle of the street? And unfortunately, I think that single-sided notion, actual reality, as a small business owner myself, major disruption in front of a business is the last thing that any business wants. But when you're a small business and you're dependent on people being able to get to you, then that was a nightmare. And so it stopped a lot of development from coming for a very long time. And it took a lot longer. Major construction projects, as we all know, take much more time than anybody likes to think about. So that did not help. And it did not help that I don't think there was enough. The city did a lot during that time period to try to help out, but you know, it's never enough. So I think that really hurt things. I can remember when I started working on the historic district, and we would meet at the old 5 Points business office with Marva Coleman, who headed that office at that time. And the only coffee on that street was in Marva's office. And I just thought, oh, good grief, this is definitely not good. You can't even get a cup of coffee down here. Now, God bless Mona. And they had staying power like I had never seen. I would follow Fatima's parents around all over this city as they had a place moved from place to place, but it was and they were always working hard and staying in the game. So I'm hoping that 5 Points in the future will bring back some of the smaller businesses that were so needed that aren't there now. The small shops that sold what people needed don't have those right now. And there's just so many things. So I think we all just have to keep working at it. And I will keep going to Welton Cafe forever, as long as I can get there.
Me too. I can remember 5 Points as a kid. It was a place where you came. I used to swim at the swimming pool over at Curtis Park. We'd come out of the swimming pool, go by the Macklin Bakery, which is now KUVO, and smell that wonderful bread. Then come up the street and run into the wash place where you could smell the Clorox there. And there was always something good to eat. And it was a lively, warm feeling place. However, what the light rail also did was, I knew a man who had the first, and I didn't know he had done this, he had the first post office down there, plus the shoe. Mr. Coker had the shoe repair. And when he saw the light rail coming through, he knew he couldn't keep his business open and going for 3 years without having any support to keep it going. So he sold his business. Mm-hmm. And any number of small businesses like that were affected by the light rail coming through and not supporting the businesses that were right there. Didn't Selman's Records used to be on that side of the street? I'm trying to think of the other small businesses that used to be on that side of the street that were very much affected by the light rail coming through. I understand that the city paid the businesses a small fee to hang in there, but they were so tiny they couldn't stay for 3 years, and it took 3 years to build that light rail. But as a kid, it was a fun place. There was always great music, wharfing out of the buildings, and you got to see people you didn't see before. So when we came from swimming, we would walk up Welton, up to what now is what used to be the Glenarm Recreation Center, to go home the other way. And those are good memories for me about 5 Points and what it did. And the food. For Fatima's place, if I told my husband I was going to Welton Street and I didn't buy him a dinner on my way home from work, I may as well sit out on the porch. So my memories of 5 Points, in addition to, you could see the going down in urban renewal, and now we're working on gentrification, so we see these different phases. But I have very good feelings about the upcoming renaissance of 5 Points, because lots of people have figured out what a wonderful place it is.
That's wonderful. And then there's a question in the chat. What is the relationship, or how is the relationship between 5 Points and Rhino?
5 Points, Rhino is a part of 5 Points. But it's not any different from any of the other neighborhood pieces. All these other little neighborhood pieces, the Claremont area and Whittier and those places, were all a little piece of 5 Points. When you look at that overall map of what once was 5 Points, all of these locations were part of 5 Points. But, you know, human nature is you want to have a claim on just your little spot. And I'm thinking places like Rhino and that, all of that, they are claiming their little spot, but it's still all a part of 5 Points. In my knowledge of the map and all.
The 5 Points neighborhood, the statistical 5 Points neighborhood includes Rhino, and
right.
And Rhino didn't exist, if you will, until it's a modern component of the greater 5 Points neighborhood, statistical neighborhood.
Right. Well said. Well said.
Does anyone want to speak to what they think the neighborhood community sort of priorities and hopes are for the next decade as we sort of look forward?
I think it's going to be a very active cultural area. I think it's going to be an active, diverse area because of the kinds of activities that are going on in the area. and they're using the Charles Cousins Park, and they're trying to do First Fridays, and there's stuff about the murals, and we have numerous new restaurants, and we have clothing place. So I think slowly but surely, if we keep going in this direction, we will have a very diverse setting that people used to remember.
I'd like to
Like
add,
Juneteenth and jazz and 5 Points and all of those things.
and I wanted to add that too, because I think especially there's the 5 Points Business Improvement District seems to be very, very methodical and conscientious, and just has this worldview about keeping that community lifted up. And they've come up with a lot of wonderful ideas about how to lift up that community, bring small Black businesses back in, trying to connect with different community groups that are in the neighborhood already. It's always been a multi-ethnic neighborhood, and they're trying to make sure that those ideas and things that happened from way back are part of the process of what they're doing for the future. So they're a critical component to seeing some of the things that are happening in the neighborhood. So I have a lot of hope, and I'm excited about the idea of some of the things that I've seen, and especially some of the work that they've done. Mr. Cowens is part of that organization. Just a brilliant young man that's got some great ideas, and so many of the other people that are participating. And then we also have Norm Harris had a liquor store on Welton Street, and his grandson, Norm Harris III, does the Juneteenth programs and things, which really helps to celebrate the community as well. And then KUVO is involved with the jazz and 5 Points history, and the efforts and the energy they put in place to help uplift the community. The Blair-Caldwell African American Research Library and everything that they have in place, and all of the outreach and the work that the Blair-Caldwell Library does, is making a tremendous difference in the neighborhood and the community, and people understanding the breadth and depth of that. And one thing I have to suggest to everyone, if you have not had jerk chicken and greens and yams, that's your homework assignment, and you need to go down and get you some jerk chicken and greens and yams at Welton Street Cafe. That's a homework assignment. Then you'll understand part of that history and the flavor of 5 Points. So there's just so many components to this community that we need to continue to celebrate and uplift. The Black American West Museum, we're not going anywhere. We're planning to continue to celebrate that history of Dr. Justina Ford and all of the 7,000 babies that she delivered. We still have some of those family members in our neighborhood, and we want to continue to lift that up and celebrate. So we have a lot of hope and excitement for what we hope to see as it transitions back into this global environment and universal environment down there. We're hopeful and excited about it.
And I think those people who are active doing these things really begin to appreciate what possibilities there still are available to you to do something different and creative and include the youngsters. That's the biggest piece that we want to keep moving with, is getting the youngsters to understand their culture, where they came from, how and why, and then how they can make it more creative and make it better. And Fatima, I have to have catfish. Add that to the list.
I'm on mute. Oh, yes. No, I appreciate that. And Miss Terri, you said to bring in the youngsters, and I'm always like, where's everybody who knows the history? I said, because sometimes I feel like people are just going toward the new 5 points, I said, no, we need everybody because we learn from everybody. So I'm definitely hopeful for a bright 5 points. And I'm always one of those people who are just like, we're going to reach out to people who are not in 5 points and keep reaching out to them so that they can continue coming down here and celebrating with us. So much of this place is about the people, and we have to keep that network and that connection strong in order for us to all be here. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
Well, Miss Fatima, I have to tell you, in my mind, you have been an absolute blessing to the community, and the things that you do to keep us lifted up, and the things that you've done to make sure that people know what's happening there, all the diversity and the range of experiences that people can have. But you have been an absolute blessing, and one of the biggest visionary people that I've encountered, and I appreciate you so very much.
I appreciate the encouragement because it's been a heck of a COVID. And,
right.
I stand with Welton Street Cafe movement. So it's been a lot of moving pieces, and yeah, I'll keep everybody updated. Our hashtag this month is Stay Woke September. So if you're on social media, follow us on Facebook, IG, Welton Street Cafe, so that you can just stay updated on everything that's going on.
The other unique thing that Landmark did was to put those identity plaques on those buildings so that people, when they walk and do the tour, they have some knowledge about who the owner was and the activity that happened in that building. I think that was a very unique piece to put there to encourage our visitors to know what went on in 5 Points in those buildings.
Another piece of that historic district, there's actually, we did a presentation about the Welton, and originally it was named the Welton Street Cultural Historic District, and then changed to the 5 Points Cultural Historic District. So if you hear me say Welton Street, because that was what has been in my brain, and that was the first brand, but we fixed it. But we did a presentation about the district at one of the National Trust conferences. Everett Shigeta and I did that presentation. Everett was the staff architect for the Landmark Commission at the time the district came into existence. And then the Chris Smith, who was one of the city planners, and I did a presentation at the Pratt Institute in New York, and to the New York Landmark Commission about the 5 Points Historic District. And so it's gotten a lot of interest around the country because it was the first model for cultural historic districts. And the Gansevoort Historic District and the Meatpacking District in New York City has taken some of its cues from the 5 Points Historic District. In fact, one of the people involved in that district's formation came to tour 5 Points. And so we've had a lot of really good interest. And so, you know, so we were first once again, where
there you go.
Yep. And so, you know, everybody, I think that the people there, Tima, just keep doing what you're doing, and I can keep dragging people in there or take it out, whatever I got to do. And so while everybody else is talking about fried chicken and stuff, I still love those oxtails. So there you have it.
And we'll have some tomorrow. So every Friday, every Friday, every Friday. So Tuesday through Saturday, we're open for business. get here before 6:30 if you want to have a seat with us, and we'll feed you. If not, I don't know. Figure that out, because some days I can't even look in the dining room. I'm like, where did all these people just come from? So get in where you fit in. That's what I say.
That's right.
I also just wanted to mention Brother Jeff Farard.
Oh, yeah.
He's such an incredible, amazing person that continues to celebrate that. And Ryan over at Coffee at the Point is someone else we need to celebrate with the history and the neighborhood as well. So I want to make sure we talk about how much energy and effort they've also contributed to our community and to making sure that we have a viable place. Brother Jeff working to help small business owners in his space and all of the other things that he does in that space. So amazing individuals that are part of that history of 5 Points, that are making history in 5 Points, that see a future and possibilities. Want to celebrate them.
Yes. Agreed.
Well, that's the yummiest homework I think I've ever had. So I'm super excited to take on that challenge. This was amazing, ladies. Thank you so much for a great conversation. And I think I learned so much more about the neighborhood, and this was just so amazing. We will archive all of this and send out the links. You can watch it again, get all of the links that we put in the chat to all of the places that Miss Terri Nelson talked about, Miss Terri Gentry, Sharon, including links to the design reviews. You can look at all of the 7 contributing structures. You can visit businesses like the Welton Street Cafe for that yummy homework. So lots of things to continue to learn and explore. So thank you so much for being our amazing panel this evening and joining us. Allison has a survey that she just dropped in the chat. We'd love to hear from you about what you learned about this program and everything that happened, and how we can continue to do this great program. Allison, do we have anything else to sort of wrap up this evening?
I don't think so. If you had fun kind of having a conversation about historic places and how they connect to today, our next Empowered by Place is November 4th. Same time, also in a virtual space. So you just register, it's free like always. And then since Mary brought up Terry's tour of 5 Points, I thought I'd mention that the next one she's giving for us is on September 25th at 10 a.m. And you can register for that at historicdenver.org.
And then as we go into sort of October, we also have a cool program coming up called The Architecture of the Haunted House. So if you want to learn what makes old houses spooky, we're going to dive into the architectural reasons why that might be and the cultural and historical reasons. So thank you again to all of our amazing speakers. Please drop in any last minute questions or stay on the line for a minute if you want to chat. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us this evening, everyone.
Hi, Meredith. I just wanted to say hi to somebody. Hi, Meredith.
Good to see you, Sharon. I'm still working with Ken.
Oh, good.
So I'm curious about the Rissonian and what's going on there. And just an aside, you would appreciate this. I'm good buddies with Charlie Burrell. He was my mom's dining buddy. And so he's such a joy to have in my life, let me tell you.
Oh, yes.
And it's really exciting to see all the stuff that Daryl Anderson is doing, the visuals.
Right.
With you know, just a remarkable man. But if somebody can talk about what's going on with the Rissonian.
Well, I can say that they are creating a documentary, and I think it's going to be over in France about Charlie Burrell's musical life and history. It's it will take a while, but I'm sure everyone will find out about it. I am not well versed in what's happening in the Rossonian just yet. I think they're, how they're starting. And I don't think anything has been totally, cinched, but we could probably ask the owners, and they might be happy to share. That might be a good program.
That would be a fabulous program because it's such a gem. And hats off to people like Carl and all those people that preserve so many beautiful structures.
Right.
But I just want to say thank you to ladies. Everyone, you've just done this fabulous program, and I think you see what you know. And Terry Nelson, as you were saying about the plaques, and it just spurs curiosity. And like when you go on a scavenger hunt, you start discovering things, and 5 Points truly is a gem.
Right. Agreed. Agreed.
And thanks, Sharon, for all your hard work.
For the years of hard work.
Well, it's really fun, and it's fun to do it with all of the fun people that I encounter. And like I said, both the Terrys that I've known for quite a number of years. In fact, Terri Gentry and I have known each other since she was in a totally different career.
I'm glad you didn't say how many years ago that was.
No, I didn't say.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Thank you
All
all
right.
so much for the invitation this
Thank
evening.
you.
It was such an honor to be part of that conversation.
And
Thank you
spread
very
the
much.
joy. We are happy to spread the joy and the information. There's so much out there.
Yep.
Yes.
So, all right. Thank you all.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right.